Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's midnight now here in Ankara, and this is a new edition of Panorama News. In the upcoming 45 minutes, we'll be bringing you the latest of the political, business and sports news happening all around the world. I'm Hani Saif. I'll be bringing you the political and business news for tonight, but we'll start off with the political ones, and the headlines lead the way. President Sisi meets British media outlets ahead of his forthcoming visit to London. Investigators still probe deadly Russian plane crash in Egypt. And Foreign Minister Shukri and EU Foreign Policy Chief Mogherini stress their keenness to boost Egyptian-European ties. Welcome back. The news in details. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi will visit the United Kingdom from the 4th till the 6th of November in an official visit that emphasizes the keenness of both countries to push their bilateral relations to a new arena of partnership that would support stability and sustainable development in Egypt. Presidential spokesman Ala Yousaf said that during his visit to Britain, President al-Sisi will hold a meeting with Prime Minister David Cameron to discuss boosting bilateral relations in all fields, as well as the recent regional developments and challenges, yet atop of them terrorism. He said that the President will also meet with British Defence Secretary Michael Fallon to discuss security and military cooperation in the face of terrorism threats. Yousaf said that the President will also meet with a number of members of the British House of Commons to ensure the opening of a new direct channel between the two British houses and the Egyptian Parliament to boost political and popular contact. The President's visit is also to witness an extensive activities and meetings with a number of mega British companies and businessmen to propagate for Egypt's investment opportunities and discuss further increasing the capacity of trade exchange. He will also meet with the President of the European Central Bank for reconstruction and development to discuss the activities of the bank in the Egyptian market. Finally, the President will meet with several British intellectuals to present Egypt's vision regarding the democratic path in Egypt, the economic transition, as well as means of solving current crises in the Middle East. On the occasion of his visit to the United Kingdom, President Sisi held a number of interviews with a number of British media outlets, the Daily Telegraph and the BBC English. Presidential spokesman Ala Yousaf said the interviews tackled the Egyptian-British relations and means of boosting them in all fields, particularly the political and economic ones. It also covered the situation in Egypt and changes Egypt passed throughout the past 4 years and the features of the democratic process witnessed in the country to fulfill the aspirations of its people, as well as regional developments and the threat of terrorism. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi met on Monday with head of the Armed Forces Financial Authority and head of the National Service Projects. During the meeting, the President approved a plan to build a huge phosphate fertilizer complex in El Ain al-Sukhna area using Italian, Spanish and Chinese technologies, with the aim of covering needs of the local market and exporting the surplus. The complex will include 9 mega factories with capacity production of 1 million tons a year. The projects will be implemented under the supervision of a Nasra company. A plane carrying the remains of 144 people killed when a Russian airliner crashed in Egypt landed in St. Petersburg early on Monday, hours after investigators probing the doomed flight said it had broken up in the air. The emergency Russian plane, the first to bring back the bodies of those who died when the A321 plummeted from the sky above the Sinai Peninsula, arrived in the Pulkovo airport of Russia's second largest city. A second plane carrying victims of the Russian passenger jet set to leave Egypt Monday evening. Russian officials said as relatives prepared to identify the remains of their loved ones in St. Petersburg. Investigators from several countries have joined an Egypt-led probe to determine what brought down Russian airline flight 9268 on Saturday, killing all 224 people on board en route from Sharm el-Sheikh to St. Petersburg. Investigators from the Egyptian and Russian aviation ministries as well as Airbus company continued on Monday analyzing the 2 black boxes of the Russian plane that crashed on Saturday in Sinai. The Russian plane owner said that a technical fault may be the cause of the plane crash, hailing the pilot who worked earlier in the Russian Air Force. Earlier, the plane's black box data recorders were recovered and sent for analysis as the Russian officials arrived in Cairo with a team of experts to help with an Egyptian-led investigation. Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry and EU Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini stressed on Monday that Egypt and the EU are keen to better relations in various fields. During a joint press conference between the two diplomats, Shoukry said that Egyptian-European ties are strong and had resulted in achieving many developmental projects in Egypt. During their meeting, they also discussed regional developments, including Palestinian file, the Syrian crisis and the situation in Libya, stressing that Egypt's priority is to reach a national unity government in Libya. Earlier on Monday, Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry concluded his visit to Algeria, where he met his Algerian and Italian counterparts to discuss the situation in Libya. Foreign Ministry spokesman Ahmed Abu Zeid said that Shoukry participated in the foreign ministers' trilateral meeting to discuss the Libyan crisis. Abu Zeid said that this is the third meeting of this trilateral mechanism concerning the situation in Libya. The spokesman said that Shoukry stressed on the need to reach a political solution in Libya and to form a national unity government. Meanwhile, Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry asserted that there are no differences in views between Egypt and Algeria concerning the political measures that should be taken to solve in Libya. Shoukry added that there is an agreement between Egypt and Algeria on the importance of finding a political solution for the Libyan crisis. The High Elections Committee announced the final list of the nominees in the second phase of the parliamentary elections. The spokesman of the High Election Committee, Councillor Omar Marwan, said campaigning starts once the final list of the nominees is released until the 20th of November. Prime Minister Sharif Ismail received on Monday Spain ambassador to Cairo to discuss ways of cooperation between the two countries. During the meeting, the Premier welcomed the participation of some Spanish companies in production and services projects in Egypt. The projects include the sectors of transportation, railway, gas and oil production, chemical and petrochemical projects, as well as car industry. The Prime Minister also called on ministers of electricity and housing to help a number of Spain's projects held in Egypt. For his part, Spanish ambassador to Egypt expressed his country's hopes for more economic and investment cooperation in the coming phase. Israeli authorities claimed that 4 Palestinians attacked Israeli soldiers in the occupied West Bank and civilians in the Tel Aviv suburbs with knives on Monday, and that one of them was shot dead. Now, the second month, the worst spate of violence since the 2014 Gaza war has been caused by tensions over Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, a site sacred to both Muslims and Jews, and by deadlocked talks with Israel on Palestinian statehood.
4 Israelis were stabbed in attacks Monday, the first outside Jerusalem and the West Bank in 10 days, while a Palestinian teenager who allegedly tried to knife a soldier was shot dead. Israeli border police also stormed a Palestinian university in the occupied West Bank. More than a month of violence that has raised fears of a third Palestinian Intifada uprising. An Israeli in his 70s was left in serious condition after he was stabbed by a Palestinian in Netanya, 30 kilometers north of Tel Aviv. Earlier, 3 Israelis were stabbed in attacks near the central bus station Lizion, about 10 kilometers south of Tel Aviv. The attacker, a 19-year-old Palestinian from Hebron in the West Bank, stabbed 2 people on the pavement and a third in the closed store. The Israeli Foreign Ministry said one of the victims was an 80-year-old woman, while the country's medical service said 2 of the 3 Israelis stabbed were in severe condition. The attacker was arrested by security forces and he was locked in the shop.
UN peace envoy Staffan de Mistura on Monday urged new ceasefires in Syria to build on diplomatic efforts to end the country's 4-year war. De Mistura met Syrian Foreign Minister Walid al-Mu'allem at the end of a trip to Damascus to brief the government on international talks in Vienna. He said that ceasefires would show the political discussions were having an impact. Talks brought together diplomats from 17 nations, as well as the United Nations and the European Union, but included no Syrian government or opposition representation. Participants agreed to ask the United Nations to broker a peace deal between the regime and opposition to clear the way for a new constitution and UN-supervised elections. Suspected Russian warplanes bombed the outskirts of Daesh-held Palmyra on Monday, sending smoke rising out of that includes a historic castle overlooking the Syrian city's Roman ruins.
Militant group around the ancient city of Palmyra as Moscow pressed on with its bombing campaign in Syria. Russian Defense Ministry said in a statement the Su-25 jets hit a fortified position in the Tadmor area of Homs province. As a result of a direct strike, a fortification, an underground bunker, and anti-aircraft artillery were destroyed. It appeared to be the first time that Russia has confirmed a strike close to the UNESCO World Heritage Site after Moscow denied Syrian state television claims that it hit the ancient city in early October. Rami head of the Britain-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights confirmed that several strikes hit the city's historical citadel, but had no further details. Elsewhere in Homs province, the observatory said at least 10 people had been killed and more wounded in strikes on Al-Qaraitain, a Daesh-held town. Russia did not specify when the strike took place, but said its jet struck over 237 targets in Syria over the past 2 days.
Yemeni military sources said on Monday that the Arab coalition battling Houthi rebels in Yemen has provided pro-government forces in the besieged city of Taiz with dozens of armored vehicles. The coalition has sent 30 military vehicles, including to forces loyal to President Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi in Taiz, the southwestern gateway to the rebel-held capital. Meanwhile, 12 pro-government fighters, part of a 500-strong Yemeni force sent from the main southern city of Aden, were killed in a late Sunday ambush by the rebels en route to Taiz. Taiz has remained in the hands of fighters loyal to President Mansour Hadi, but the Houthi rebels and their allies have besieged it for months, with clashes raging between rival forces. The United Nations on Monday urged Libya's warring factions to agree on a unity government after they were offered proposals to ease concern a regional distribution in a UN-backed power-sharing deal. The UN said in a statement after consultations with both sides that a proposed presidential council would be expanded from 6 to 9 members, including a prime minister, 5 deputy premiers, and 3 senior ministers. Members of Libya's 2 rival parliaments were scheduled to meet separately to discuss the proposal on Tuesday. The product of months of negotiations, the UN proposal for a national government includes members of both factions and attempts to reflect Libya's traditional regional balance. Hardliners have resisted the deal. A lower court in Kuwait on Monday sentenced 5 men to 10 years in jail, each for raising funds for the Daesh terrorist group. According to the court ruling, 3 of those convicted were Kuwaiti citizens. The court ordered that the remaining 2, who were foreigners, be deported after serving a term. Their nationalities were not immediately clear. It also acquitted 2 others. The men were charged with raising about $1.3 million and transferring the funds to Daesh militants, which has seized control of large parts of Syria and Iraq and carried out attacks in the Middle East. Somalia Shabab had ambushed a group of military trainees southwest of the capital Mogadishu and killed 30 of them. A Somali military officer confirmed the ambush, adding that fighting was still going on. The ambush came a day after 13 people were killed after Shabab militants stormed a hotel in Mogadishu where government officials and lawmakers stay. Ahmed Ibrahim, the military officer, said that Shabab ambushed the Somali military commando trainees and captured 2 military pickup trucks. The militants were to topple the Western-backed Somali government, and local authorities often cite different numbers of casualties after such attacks. The Somali government is battling to rebuild the Horn of Africa nation after more than 2 decades of conflict. Burundi's President Pierre Nkurunziza gave gunmen a 5-day deadline on Monday to lay down arms after a string of battles with security forces with 8 fighters killed in the latest attacks. Nkurunziza said the number 7 deadline was a last call, as he warned those who commit crimes to his path in a speech broadcast on state radio. Those gunmen who chose to surrender under the amnesty will be given 2 weeks of civic training and then be freed with no further punishment. In the latest violence, 8 gunmen were killed and 18 others captured in Burundi after clashes with police outside Bujumbura. A police spokesman said the clashes with armed criminals took place in the rural Naibaria district. Naibaria is a stronghold of the National Liberation Forces, one of the main ethnic rebel groups during Burundi's 13-year civil war, which ended in 2006. German Chancellor Angela Merkel called Turkish Prime Minister Ahmed Davutoglu Monday to congratulate him on an election victory and urged swift joint action to deal with the migrant crisis, a government spokesman said. The vote came at a critical time for Turkey on the global stage. States dependent on Turkish air bases in the fight against Islamic State in Syria, and the European Union desperate for Turkish help with its growing migration crisis. The White House on Monday voiced displeasure at the intimidation of Turkish journalists during an election that bolstered the already strong hand of its longtime president Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Just weeks before President Barack Obama meets Erdogan in Turkey, spokesman Josh Earnest said the White House was deeply concerned that media outlets and individual journalists critical of the government were subject to pressure and intimidation during the campaign. Sunday's election delivered a clear victory to Erdogan's Justice and Development Party, a dramatic turnaround after it lost its parliamentary majority in June. Earlier Monday, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe issued a damning report on the vote, which it described as marred by a media crackdown, violence and other security issues. For his part, Erdogan cast the return of Turkey to single-party rule as a vote for stability that the world must respect. But opponents fear it heralds growing authoritarianism and deeper polarization. The result handed the AKP 317 of the 550 seats in parliament, only 13 short of the number Erdogan would need for a national referendum on constitutional changes he wants to forge a presidential system granting him full executive powers. The vote came at a critical time for Turkey on the global stage, with the United States dependent on Turkish air bases in the fight against Daesh in Syria, and the European Union desperate for Turkish help with its growing migration crisis. Erdogan's victory, 2 weeks ahead of a G20 leaders summit in Turkey, leaves Western allies dealing with an emboldened leader they may already know, but whose cooperation has not always been easy to secure. The UN Refugee Agency said Monday more than 218,000 refugees and other migrants crossed the Mediterranean in October, a record monthly tally this year and more than in the whole of last year. The massive influx, despite cooling weather and choppy waters, highlights the strains that European policymakers and authorities have been under with the unprecedented flood of people fleeing countries including Syria, Iraq and Afghanistan through Turkey to Greece this year. The Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees estimates that more than 600,000 people have now crossed the Mediterranean this year. UNHCR said 210,265 people crossed the sea from Turkey to Greece last month. A further 8,129 went from North Africa to Italy in the period to October 29th. The agency estimates about 216,000 people crossing the Mediterranean last year, while some 3,000 crossed Turkey's land border. These are all the political news we have for now. Now it's time for all the business and economic updates, and the headlines lead the way.